Hello and welcome to this video on the extremely rare third lineage of humans, the Denisovians. Humans are generally seen as either Homo sapien, or in some other cases, some degree of Neanderthal. There's also some cases where you could argue there is a lot of Neanderthal DNA. There is a rare third group that has contributed to human genome. These are the Denisovians. They are a very rare sample of fossils from which we were able to extract some genetic information. The presence of both Denisovians and Neanderthals predates Homo sapiens to some extent across most of the globe. Unfortunately, genetic information is all we have, as there are almost no other remains to speak of than those from roughly 7 individuals, and even those 7 individuals are either only a partial skeleton or fragments of bones. What information available indicates that there is some degree of similarity between Denisovians and Neanderthals, but there's also similarity to other Homo sapien relatives of the same era. One theory is that Neanderthals split off, and partially they went east, and this became the Denisovians. Those who went west are what we now know as Neanderthals. Physically, they have large molars. Their features very similar to Neanderthals. Their molars aren't anything like a modern human, and they don't seem to have a lot of unique features, having mostly derived what they have from Neanderthals. The jaw is somewhat unique in that it is shorter but more strongly built than that of a Neanderthal. It's thought that Denisovians would have had a much wider pelvis, a large rib cage, and articulating surfaces that were very wide. They also had a low forehead and broader skull. This means they have a large cranial cavity, much larger than the modern human. Unfortunately, a lot of this is subject to speculation based on a variety of different things, but the big one is methylation of the genome to identify what genes were and were not active in the samples that had DNA that could be salvaged. This means that it is a very uncertain and questionable estimation of what their physique was actually like. We already mentioned that, at least initially, there seems to have been a division from Neanderthals, and we do know something about the Denisovian distribution. They lived in Siberia all the way down to Australia, in a roughly longitudinal distribution. They may have been present as far as Western Eurasia, or countries that now make the former Soviet bloc. They would also have been as far east as Japan. There's an anomaly as well, and that is that there is a high proportion of Icelanders with Denisovian DNA. Denisovians split from the family tree of Homo sapien about 363 million years ago, and then again about 280 millennia ago. They remained a relatively independent species, with isolated populations independent from Homo sapiens until 14 millennia ago, when they were either bred out or incorporated into Homo sapiens. This last part is especially important in DNA-based research. It's well established that Neanderthals, Denisovians, and Homo sapiens definitely were very closely related, that they met, and that there was interbreeding between the 3 species. This means you can find genes that are distributed amongst each in particular clusters of people who have come down certain lines. This is one of the things that those at-home DNA test kits for your family tree tend to try and make use of, and often sell as a much more important feature than it really is. When it comes to Denisovians, there is some interesting things you can pull out of this. For example, Europeans and Asians have about 1 to 4% of their DNA from Neanderthals, but when you look at other Asian populations, such as Tibetans, Polynesians, and Australian Aborigines, 3 to 5% of their DNA is from Denisovians. And you can begin to see how you might be able to figure out some kind of movement of ancestors or different peoples over time by looking at the different spread of these particular stretches of DNA. This is also important for another reason. Despite being distinct species, Denisovians were sexually compatible with Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. This led to hybrids of the three species. Compatibility was not a perfect thing. In some cases, Neanderthal and Denisovian male offspring appear to have been sterile, while female offspring were not. We can observe something similar in animals that are present in the modern day. If you have a horse and a donkey and they breed, you will get a mule, and a mule is generally sterile. The effects we see from this weird interbreeding and, frankly, bizarre and ill-understood particular species is seen in some of our genes that are very relevant now. Homo sapiens, when they mated with Denisovians, and this had to have occurred many times, would have created some of today's more noteworthy genes. For example, one that is involved in making humans more adapted to living at high altitudes. This is the EPAS1 gene. EPAS1 is responsible for changing how the body deals with hypoxia, which occurs at high altitudes. There's also other genes involved in phospholipid transport, the amine-associated receptors, and a few others. Some of these are involved in beneficial mutations, and others are adverse. The differences in their prevalence and activity can be traced back to Denisovian ancestry. All of this is to say that Denisovians are poorly understood, little is known of them, and some would even go so far as to posit that we should not call them a new species. Despite all of that, they have a lasting effect on humans and our genome, with some benefiting greatly and others losing out based on the inheritance of Denisovian DNA. DNA that we could only extract from a small number of fossilized remains that have been found in a very small number of locations, and that we know almost nothing about this species that has changed humanity in certain areas in very pronounced ways. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.